Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, 5 Steps to Developing Customer-Centric Omni-Channel Marketing Strategies. I'm Jeanette Rumsey, Corporate Education and Engagement Manager for AccuData, and today's webinar moderator. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few important items with you. First, questions can be submitted throughout today's webinar, but will be covered at the end of the presentation. Please use the Q&A panel within the GoToWebinar platform to submit your questions. If there are questions that we do not cover, email them to info@accudata.com for a prompt reply. You can also call your AccuData representative at 800-732-3440. Next, I'd like to introduce today's presenters, Ed Giordano and Sean Kellum. Ed is AccuData's Senior Vice President of Strategic Accounts and has been with AccuData since 2002. Ed is responsible for all aspects of sales and business development across AccuData's robust end-user verticals. Sean is a VP of Business Development in AccuData's Strategic Accounts channel and has been with AccuData for 18 years. He specializes in developing data-driven direct marketing strategies for his clients. And Ed, at this point, I would like to go ahead and turn things over to you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Sean, myself, and Jeanette are going to do the best we can to take you through what we see as the major steps in omni-channel marketing planning, what that does for you and your marketing efforts, as well as some of the benefits you'll see with an effective strategy and plan. So we're going to define the role of omni-channel and customer journey, the 5 steps involved with that process, the desired outcome, sort of personalized on your behalf, and then at the end, hopefully, we've got some time to address some questions. So before we dive into omni-channel marketing, one of the questions that we get quite often is, what does it really mean? And also, is it multi-channel the same as omni-channel? And in actuality, they're quite different in our view. To some degree, when you think of multi-channel, those are tactics, you know, the way that you communicate with your clients, the process that you do that, the messaging, and the overall strategy around that. Where omni-channel, I would term more of a strategy and more of a very much a customer-centric, customer behavior-driven type of strategy, where we're going to deliver messages both in a timing perspective and in a messaging perspective to the customer, and how they react to it is going to drive how we communicate to them. So this is kind of an interesting visual of really what our goals should be from a customer decision journey. You know, when you see that circle to the left where initial consideration, you know, as consumers now, we have so much more at our fingertips on how we make a buying decision and the research that we do. So you'll see that arrow go across the top as active evaluation. And then at the moment of purchase, they're going to make their buying decision, and ultimately there should be some sort of post-purchase experience, even if it's brick and mortar type of store, where hopefully you're collecting that information, even maybe through a POS system, or even, you know, as simple as some sort of profile center entering their information in there. But we want to enter those consumers into a loyalty loop where we're going to communicate with them in some fashion and hopefully keep them engaged and keep them coming back. That is sort of the customer decision journey. And when we think of multi-channel marketing, one of the pitfalls is we're assuming that those clients are in the same sort of decision-making process. They're doing the same research at the exact same time, and then they have a buying need at the exact same time, and we're trying to communicate to them in that fashion, and that's not really realistic. Sean's going to take us through some of the omni-channel planning and some of the multi-channel differences still.
Thank you, Ed. So this is Sean. So I'm going to take a little bit of time now to talk in more granular detail about multi-channel marketing and omni-channel strategies. Starting with multi-channel marketing. Multi-channel marketing is a one-to-many communication approach that treats customers and prospects as if they were all on the same journey. Multi-channel strategies tend to be much more tactical and have very specific marketing and budgetary goals for each channel. While the campaigns allow a brand to interact with a current or prospective customer through a variety of media platforms, the communications are typically scheduled in advance and deployed in mass and have a clear starting and end date. That is a very important point here. Very clear starting and end point, very campaign specific. For most brands, multi-channel marketing is simply using the most channels possible to get engagement, and it's really just a casting of the net mentality. Moving on to omni-channel strategies. So the omni-channel approach takes a different approach. It puts the individual customer, not the channel, at the center of the strategy. The heart of an omni-channel campaign provides a seamless shopping experience in brick-and-mortar stores and through a variety of digital campaigns. Think of omni-channel as kind of a fusion of the showrooms and multi-channel marketing. Brands embracing omni-channel strategies are doing so as they're understanding customers are interacting with preferred brands the way that is most convenient for the consumer. And that consumer is often using multiple channels simultaneously. Think of that time you stood in a retail store with your cell phone in your hand, surfing through, doing some research, checking prices, trying to get more information on a particular product that was right in front of you. So let's take it a step further. So let's consider a Harvard Business Review that was recently completed for 14 months on shopping behavior. They looked at 46,000 consumers who were asked about every aspect of their shopping journey with retailers. The conversations focused on which channels they used and why. The why being the most important part here. 73% of the shoppers used multiple channels during their shopping journey. Only 7% purchased online only, and only 20% purchased in-store only. So of those 73% who used multiple channels during their journey, the research found increased spending, they had larger in-store purchases, greater loyalty, and they were more likely to recommend the brand to a friend. 10% of the omni-channel shoppers spent more than a single shopper. Online research also showed consumers spent 13% more in the store. Again, that activity while they're in the store created more spend. 23% had a repeat shopping trip within 6 months, and the omni-channel shoppers were more likely to recommend to a friend. These are all very telling statistics that a brand marketer would take notice of. All right, so let's dig into those 5 steps. We're going to talk about the 5 steps to a customer-centric omni-channel campaign. Before we get right into the steps, I want to talk a little bit about how omni-channel marketing is seasoned to the taste. So what I mean by that is, think about apple pie. My favorite apple pie is a little warm. It has a little bit of ice cream on it, vanilla ice cream, and it has cinnamon flavor to it. But not everybody feels the same way. Some people like raisins, some people like cheddar cheese melted on it. But these 5 steps are going to show you that you can season the recipe for your business to the taste that meets your goals. At this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Ed.
Thanks, Sean. This is Ed. We thought a food analogy was pretty important right after lunchtime.
Yes, I'm very hungry now.
So, let's start walking through the steps. The first step that we're going to cover today is understanding your audience. This is a pretty important step, and I think it's pretty important to know this before we jump into any of the execution of tactics. One of the things that resonated with me personally is, at the same time we were looking at all this information, my youngest son is learning the scientific process at school. And for those of you who have those memories of middle school and high school, one of the steps in that process is data gathering. And that's really what we're doing. We're understanding our audience. And one of the things that you need to remember as you're going through this is, as much of this information, if not all of this information, needs to be objective. We want to avoid sort of a personal relationship with different campaigns that may have been an idea generated by you or your team, or an intuitive gut feeling on what our customers are and what they look like. We need to use as much objectivity as possible, and with the end in mind being understanding, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Was there a good offer or a challenging offer, or subject lines, the timing of this, the importance of channels. Do you have POS information? Do you collect loyalty information? What are the types of campaigns that you're engaging with? All of this should really be collected and analyzed before jumping into the functional steps of creating an omni-channel campaign or plan. This next visual is this is one of my favorites because I think it does a really, really good job of illustrating really, as marketers, who we're trying to reach and what our goal is. Most of the time in direct marketing, our goal is to drive a transaction or push a potential client to a site to complete that transaction, or push them to a store to complete that transaction. But we're all competing for that $50 that's in the center of this visual. But the important thing to remember is when you look at these two people, they're very, very different, and how they react to campaigns is almost completely opposite of one another. The gentleman on the left, he's 43 years old. He prefers email correspondence. The baby carriage represents that there's a family there as well as a healthy lifestyle they're eating. And the lady on the right, she's in her mid to late 20s. She prefers sort of mobile communication, all those transactions taking place on her mobile phone, and she's a traveler. Again, two very, very different people, and the medium of communication, the method of communication, and the timing of communication can be pretty impactful on the successful campaigns or lack thereof. So diving a little bit deeper into the first step, we have to consider those customers, thinking of that visual. Thinking of, the person on the left-hand side is a little older male with a different lifestyle, and the female on the right-hand side at a certain age and a different lifestyle. These are all demographics of that particular prospect or consumer, and what does their composite look like? We have to consider those segments, and also what is their behavior? The transactional sort of behavior we can fit into buckets of an RFM analysis potentially if you collect that information. Knowing your audience and understanding what they look like. And we've got some partners who come to us and say, well, they don't really know what their audience looks like, and they have no idea what the composite of that is. Well, there's tools that we can use to what we call profile that information. So we can take a collection of consumers, and then we can attribute or index those different demographics, psychographic, or interest information to get an understanding of what this person looks like in that database, and that helps us plan for future results.
So know the journey and have a plan. So when I was growing up, my father had a scuba diving business, and part of scuba diving is plan your dive. Have a plan, work the plan. And this is the exact same thing. So when you go on a deeper dive or a night dive or something, that deep dive, you may know that you only have 8 minutes at 100 feet, but you want to come up with air to spare. So it's plan the dive and work your plan. So let's dive into the next step. So when you're formulating that plan, put yourself in the customer's shoes. Think about how the customers are going to begin engagement with your company. Is it online, the brick and mortar, social media? As the engagement begins, how are you going to be most efficient with them to your goal and what that goal is? So is the goal a sale? Is the goal perhaps just registration on your website? But we be aware of the things that can affect that goal. If the goal is a sale, a poor social media review out there may affect that. But if you show that your company is doing something about it, consumers do appreciate that type of behavior. If there's consistently good reviews, put that on your website, brag about it a little bit. So to develop that plan, create what's called a journey map. You're mapping out the journey that looks at the consumer's process. The key is eliminating barriers. Find the challenges. We have listed a few here on the right. Has your map created seamless transition points through the journey for your customer? You may not be reaching them at the right time if you don't. one of the biggest issues we often see is mobile optimization or lack thereof. So let's remember that shopping experience I mentioned before. Someone is in the retail store, the brick and mortar, but if they look at their phone and it's not mobile optimized, they get frustrated, abandon, and walk out. Also note that social media is the key, and make sure it's working with the other channels that you're using. And make sure all the messaging and branding is consistent. So you have that plan. So with goals in mind, the surveys, the conversions, make sure all of your marketing channels focus on the goal. It's important to make sure the copy and the creative is consistent across channels. If an email is going out with an expiration, make sure it is timely. Rather than individual channels operating in silos and individual campaigns, develop a drip campaign strategy so that the channels work in concert together. That said, the strategy could and should vary with those different segments of the marketing database and vary with the customer behavior. Remember, the millennials may see a different marketing communication than that middle-aged man with a couple of children, just like Ed stated before. Part of a good plan is knowing what the goal is for success and how you will measure those goals. We're going to talk a little bit later in a few minutes about measuring those goals, but it's critically important that defining how those goals are going to be measured at the front end is a very important part of your plan.
So this is Ed again. I'm going to take you through the third step, which is creating a one-to-one marketing outcome, and it is the key to the success of the OmniChannel campaign or OmniChannel plan. We want to take that where we discussed earlier multi-channel campaigns. We want to take that multi-channel campaign to an omni-channel approach. So we're going from a one-to-many to a one-to-one marketing campaign or result. You know, what is that plan? It can get really complex. You know, Sean mentioned the importance of doing that plan, which again is one of the key components to this process. You know, be prepared to test this. Sean mentioned in step 2 having those tracking results, and you can see that on the screen here where we've got opens and clicks and all of those classic results that you see from any email campaign. Well, that data is gold, and it's very important to utilize that data, and we want to communicate to somebody who opens an email differently than we communicate to somebody who doesn't. You know, if somebody engages, we're going to talk to them differently than somebody who doesn't. Audience segments will react differently as well. Think of that visual with the gentleman on the left-hand side and the lady on the right-hand side. Well, those are two completely different audiences, and how we communicate to them, when we communicate to them, should be very, very different. You know, if we've got a subset of that audience that's not engaged, I mean, that's always going to happen when we communicate is, you know, maybe they don't open an email or maybe they don't react to a direct mail piece. Well, we need to consider the frequency or the medium of that communication, and then maybe even sweeten the pot. You know, is there an offer that we can increase to get them to engage? Is there a point where we can continue to get them through our door, so to speak, by giving them something that's interesting to them? Jeanette's going to take us through an actual personal consumer experience of omni-channel engagement, and you'll see how this works.
Okay, thanks so much, Ed. Hi, everyone. So I recently received a catalog from Pottery Barn. This is one of their scheduled campaigns. It's their early spring catalog. So I got that. I was flipping through and taking a look. I found something that interested me. So I hopped online. And with their online catalog, and you'll see in the picture on the screen, each of their featured items has a little plus sign that you can click on to get more information. So I was interested in the pillow. I clicked on that online. And a couple of days later, I got a nice reminder email that was versioned based on my engagement and online behavior. The subject line read, "These are perfect for you." The pre-header said, "Are you still interested?" And it was a thank you from Pottery Barn for stopping by to look at the pillows. So at this point in time, I went ahead and clicked through the email. I went back, I looked at the pillows again. I added an item to my shopping cart. The reason that I didn't convert at that point was because I wasn't sure if the color was correct. So a couple of days later, I received an additional email from Pottery Barn. This one was very distinct and different and was really quite customized to me. The subject line said, "Come back soon, items remain in your cart," and the pre-header said, "Still looking? We'd love to help." It was a reminder that I had left something in my cart, but prominently featured at the top of the communication was the information for the closest store to me, which is the Naples location, and also a little something to sweeten the deal. It was a 20% discount off of my order. So at that point in time, I did not do any remaining action with the email. I did not complete my order. But a few days later, I did get another reminder email from Pottery Barn that asked if I was still shopping. And the subject line was personalized for me. It read, "Something that you love is almost gone, Jeanette." And the pre-header said, "Items remain in your cart." You'll notice at the top there was a very clear call to action that says, "Come back and shop by February 6th." So at this point in time, it's really an interesting situation for Pottery Barn because now they're going to start looking at attribution and to figure out where to attribute my engagement. For me, it was the catalog that got me interested, but they're going to see me interacting with email. So I'll go ahead and turn things back over to Sean, and he's going to take you through the next part of our 5 steps.
Thanks, Jeanette. So step 4 is that holistic measuring of the results. Remember in step 2, I said when you're putting together that plan, it's very critical that you set goals on how you're going to measure the success of the campaign. So holistically measuring an omni-channel campaign is a little different than traditional multi-channel measuring of a campaign. So key performance indicators, it's the traditional form of measuring success, but it's very interesting how you view what a key performance indicator is depending on who you speak with. A digital team commonly focuses on opens and clicks and impressions, and direct mail teams often focus on responders. The ultimate measure of success needs to be outlined pre-execution. All that said, when you're bringing the silos of the multi-channel marketing together into one harmonious omni-channel concert, that attribution measurement needs to look at all the individual channels' effect on that goal or outcome. Many marketers have historically simply looked at the last touch, but more sophisticated marketers today who are empowered with more robust marketing database solutions available today are looking at attribution analysis that gives credit to each channel. So what I mean by that is it may be a time decay attribution that gives credit to each touch, but the most credit to the last touch. Or one of the other more popular models is what's called a position-based attribution, which actually weighs the first touch and the last touch most heavily, but it does give some credit along the way. So I'm going to hand it back over to Ed.
Thanks, Sean. So, a colorful step in 5 is we call it rinse and repeat. Not really. I'm going to go into some details on the next slide, but it is something to think about when we go through this process. What we mean by rinse and repeat is, not just to keep sending the same message over and over again, but to follow those steps that we recommend, where going back to the first step in any good campaign is gathering the data. What were the results? How did they work? Did the desired outcome take place? Were there things that you learned? That should fit into your second step, which is the planning. That planning is fluid. This thing, this process, if executed properly, will evolve, and it's important to be prepared for that. And also, how are the segments behaving? How is that demographic data, interest data? How does that segment look differently than the transactional type of data, and do they match up, and are there consistencies or measurables there? And number 4 is measure, 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 is understanding what are those results. Are we attributing those results properly? Are there things that we've learned to continue to evolve this process? And did you reach your goal? I think that's important to consider. What was the desired outcome? Were there impactful results? Were there a higher ROI? Was there something that you learned? I think, again, we continue to stress the importance of testing and measuring. So what's impactful to your customers? Yeah, the thing that we are trying to convey that resonates with us here is, again, this is a very customer-centric approach. So we're messaging through preferred channels. We're customizing the content on their behavior, and it's a seamless experience for the customer. Just like Jeanette's example, where she had behavior online, and that messaging was catered to her and her behavior. Now, obviously, ultimately, it did not result in a sale, but I think that the messaging was clear, and I also think it was consistent and appropriate based on what her behavior was online. So what can you expect? Well, we're revisiting a slide that Sean covered earlier, and again, these are the results that we see. Increased spending, larger in-store purchases, greater loyalty, and ultimately recommendations. The word that resonates with me when I see this and I think of omni-channel marketing, it's efficiency. It's we don't necessarily need to the old days of spray and pray. We can be very rifled in our approach, and we target customers again based on behavior and what they look like.
Excellent. Ed and Sean, thank you so much for taking our attendees through today's 5 steps to developing customer-centric omni-channel marketing strategies. So we've got some questions that have come in, and we're happy to continue taking those questions. So let's go ahead and start to address those. Real quickly before we do, I just wanted to add, a few of you have asked if the presentation will be available after today's webinar, and yes, it will be. It will be posted for you to view at AccuData.com in our resource section, and that should be available for you as of tomorrow afternoon. So at this point, we'll go ahead and address the first question. Sean, I would like to go ahead and give this to you, please. We have an audience member asking how audience profiling can help with the creation of segments.
It's a great question, and it's often a great first step. So profiling, it allows you to simply take a customer snapshot of a customer database or something like that, compare it to some national database of demographics. You get to see some distributions of demographics across that customer database, see how they're populated, how they index, but more importantly, identify if there's any subsegments within your database that can allow you to start looking at your database with smaller groups and start messaging differently rather than looking broadly or doing that mass marketing to the entire data set.
Excellent, Sean. Thank you so much. So our next question is, aren't customers intimidated by the emails that show what they're shopping for? Ed, would you go ahead and address that for us?
Sure. It's an interesting question, and it's certainly not the first time we've heard a question like this. I've been doing this for a long time, probably longer than I care to admit, but a few years ago, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, this certainly would have been maybe a privacy issue or something that we do need to consider or contend with. But I think now we've all been accustomed to a product following us, especially in our online experience. If you're shopping for a car and you go onto a particular website, then you're going to get what we call retargeted pretty often. Especially if that seller is sophisticated enough to understand the impact and the importance of that, and sometimes, and not necessarily in Jeanette's case with Pottery Barn, but she didn't take advantage of it, but they offered her an incentive to come back and shop, where she had information in her shopping cart, and they were bound and determined to get a share of that wallet. So sometimes, again, to sweeten that pot could be important. And this, again, I think as consumers, we become more and more accustomed to.
That's great, Ed. Thank you so much. So a few questions have been asked regarding pricing for different services. We will be happy to address those for you following the webinar. Each of you that has asked, I will have your account representative be in touch with you. So thank you for asking. So the next question that has come in, this is a really great question, and I think this will apply to a lot of our attendees today. We have an audience member that has asked, basically, how does he get started with omni-channel marketing? They're a smaller business. They don't have a large marketing department or a large marketing budget. Sean, would you go ahead and answer that for us, please?
Yeah, definitely. So it's a great question because, that small business doesn't have the huge marketing dollars of a corporate, big corporation, but they likely are using email because it's a cost-effective form of communication, and you can use that email and the responders and engagers of that email to start that journey. So what I mean by that is start looking at the consumers who are opening emails or clicking on email and send them follow-up engagements or in messaging that communicates to what they were looking at before. It'll start driving an additional level of behavior, increase your brand awareness, probably drive dollars.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So we've got one more question that we're going to take today, and Ed, I'm going to give this to you because it directly relates to the previous question about consumers and how they may feel intimidated by different items following them around. So we have an audience member that has asked, when he does a search online, sometimes he sees ads on Facebook after the fact. How does that work?
Yeah, very much the same as the description earlier. You know, through technology, through different products and some agency involvement, you know, we can understand as marketers through cookies, sometimes to some degree IP addresses, when, you know, this activity has been taking place. So essentially, again, you know, using that technology and understanding the physical IP address or even the cookies that are embedded in the browser or browsers, depending on, you know, on the pages that have been visited, we can use this as an effective method to retarget. And again, to Sean's point too, it is you know, we have this intelligence that whether it's a small business or a larger business that we can leverage and use to help drive additional messaging to hand raisers based on the customer experience. So again, back to the omni-channel strategy or advantages, we are marketing to people the way they want to be marketed to and when they want it to be marketed to. So these type of retargeting strategies are very, very important to incorporate in the plan.
Great, Ed. Thank you so much. So to all of our attendees, at this point, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up for today. But on behalf of Ed, Sean, myself, and the entire AccuData team, I would like to thank you for attending our webinar. And I invite you to contact us for any questions that you have on creating and deploying omni-channel strategies. I hope that you all have a terrific rest of the day. Thanks again.
Thank you.